Hey everybody, how you guys doing today? This is Jim from the Pain PT. Good to see everybody here. Appreciate all your support, and I'll keep bringing you free content here to help all of you move forward on your recovery out of chronic pain and other chronic symptoms. We have evidence of the week here today, and I'd like to bring this to you, and I'm bringing this to you this year in 2025 and hopefully into the future because I feel like we need the evidence, we need the understanding, the knowledge which can help us believe more about what's going on in our brains. And it gives us sort of this impetus to move forward and do some of the work here with the brain instead of focusing on the body. So today, evidence of the week. What do I got for you? Well, I got a paper here in 2024 that just came out in the Cognitive, Affective, and Behavioral Neuroscience Journal. And the title of this article is The Fear-Avoidance Model as an Embodied Prediction of Threat. And what we know is that this fear-avoidance model, which I've talked about before with all of you, it's well known, it's been studied for decades, it's been proven to be true. And this model essentially goes like this. You have some type of pain or symptom, injury, let's say, in your body. You have that flare up, and then you go into some type of fear, anxiety type emotional reaction around it. What that starts to do is sets off this vicious circle, which includes things I talk about, includes catastrophizing. So mentally worrying about the symptom or sensation. It also causes avoidance and hypervigilance. Those are two things we see a lot that go along with fear. When I say fear, what I really mean here is anxiety, because this stuff is not dangerous, right? Chronic pain that we're talking about here, that we talk about here, is not dangerous and threatening in your body, though it can feel that way. And this whole article is going to talk about this here, about danger and threat versus safety. So in that fear avoidance model, you get into hypervigilance, you get into avoidance. That then leads to what they call disuse, depression, disability. That makes you more fearful, more worried, more scared, more anxious, and that feeds back into this cycle. And the symptoms now can perpetuate, but they can also escalate and spread to new areas. Okay, so let's go over this paper here today, and we're going to look at two things: the fear avoidance model, which I just mentioned, and this other thing called predictive coding. You may have heard of Dr. Schubiner talk about this. This is something more recent and more new that they've been studying in the brain, that there's a algorithmic part of our brain, like a computer. The brain makes predictions based off different inputs, things that it's learned from the past, right? That's an input it draws off of. The current experience that you're going through from your body, information from your body, information from your environment, from your proprioception. So we're going to talk about this here today and combine this predictive coding model with the fear avoidance model and see what these researchers are saying about this. Okay. So what they say here is that, again, the fear avoidance model, again, it's well-established framework in the understanding of persistent pain. It proposes a dichotomous path. Either the context is interpreted as safe, say over this direction, where there's no fear reaction, and therefore the individual engages in active and positive coping. Or over here, the other context is interpreted as threatening, leading to a self-reinforcing vicious circle of fear and negative avoidance. Okay, and they also say, okay, that's the fear avoidance model, but let's also employ this within the framework of predictive coding. Okay, and I'm going to talk a bit about that here. And they say here that the key idea is that multisensory integration of what's called exteroceptive, which is information or coming in from your environment, from outside of you, coming into you, right? Those are signals. Proprioceptive signals coming from your body that picks things up from your environment, and interoceptive sensory inputs. Interoceptive means it comes from your body. Okay, these are internal signals in your body that reach your brain. Brain makes some type of judgment on or some type of interpretation on. Okay, so they say here that this key idea that this multisensory integration of exteroceptive, proprioceptive, and interoceptive sensory inputs can lead to dysfunctional experiences of threat in non-threatening situations. Okay, so it's really important to understand that basically your system through the combination of information coming in from the outside, information coming from your body, okay, and combining with past things that have happened to you. All these inputs go in to the brain. The brain has an output, okay, and it can lead to, like this here, quote unquote, dysfunctional, meaning that's not normal, experiences of threat in non-threatening situations. So I talk a lot about this, how the threat or danger lives in your brain. It comes from your brain and your brain's interpretation of these things. When actually there's nothing threatening or harmful happening or dangerous occurring. We're actually safer than we believe. We're safer than that limbic brain of ours believes. So our job again is to teach it safety instead of allowing it and accepting it to go into danger and threat and staying there. Okay, so what they say here is that when you have this threat inference, it can promote fear responses, maladaptive strategies, like I mentioned, like avoidance, and self provides evidence for threat in associated or future context. So what happens now, again, is the brain's experienced this, as you can imagine, it's in your memory. The brain pulls off memory, right? It pulls off learning. It pulls off things that you believe now and you have experienced in the future. Okay, so what it says here is that it provides evidence for threat in associated or future contexts, okay, or both. So again, this is another input that you might be having and why your brain reacts. Let's say, for example, you're doing something that's completely normal, completely benign, but your brain reacts giving you some type of symptoms in your body, emotional reaction. And the brain could be pulling off from old information, from old experiences, from memories, from things that have happened to you. And that input could be strong enough to say, oh, there's threat or danger here. There's this reminds the brain of something that happened before. And the brain goes off in some reaction that's, like I said, not true, right? It's a false reaction, you can say, or an irrational reaction, because there isn't anything truly threatening happening, but the brain perceives the threat or danger. Okay, but this is what can happen. So what we see here again, they say under this idea of this treatment, the prediction, okay, the predictive coding of non-realized threat becomes self-evidencing and context invariant, okay, and hence self-perpetuating. Okay, so this, again, this predictive coding brain can come in and predict threat or danger when there isn't anything. That starts to become what happens now in situations that are completely normal. And that actually starts to become self-perpetuating too. So it repeats itself. You can say it becomes learned or conditioned now. And our job here, right, as you know, is to decondition, to unlearn, to desensitize this brain that's feeling quite sensitive and protective and guarding and feels under threat or danger. That's why we're experiencing these symptoms in the body, or these sensations, I call them. Okay, so let's talk a little more about this paper, a little more detail. I want to pull out a few things here that might be of importance to you that you guys can take from this to understand. When our nervous system, our brain are looking for homeostasis, they want balance, okay? They want sort of this state of equilibrium. So if there's any type of surprise in the system, any kind of shock or surprise, it can throw off the system, and the system has to adjust for that. And it will take that in the future and make predictions off that based on, again, something that's happening now. And this is all from your central nervous system, okay? And so the central nervous system, as they say here, really strives hard to minimize the discrepancy between the prediction it has based on something you've already been through and the actual situation, the actual sensory state. Sometimes there's what's called the prediction error there. There's a difference there. And the brain also goes into what's called precision weighting, okay, I mentioned here. It's one of these things that where something's assigned a lot of weight or a lot of importance, okay, the brain could do this. And it says here that we can think of like prior predictions, okay, so something that's happened before, priors in the past, in terms of learning, okay, so this precision weighting of the brain could be biased to the past now, meaning precision learning from the past can start to input into the present. Okay, so they say here that we can think of prior predictions in terms of learning that has already occurred, for example, about possible threats to the body when considering the nociceptive system. okay, the pain system. And what we see here is what they mentioned here, which is really important, I think, is that the result of this kind of precision weighting can rely more on past learning when new sensory information is weighed as imprecise and unreliable. So something's coming in and your brain's not sure what it means or what it could be. It's uncertain. The brain's going to draw up the past, right? And that's going to weigh in here and actually could kick out an output or a reaction in you of symptoms or emotional reaction because the brain feels threatened. Even though, again, there isn't anything happening. There isn't any real danger or threat happening in the current reality. But this is what the brain can do. So it's important to understand this. And this can be seen through a lens of not only fear avoidance, but through a lens of what's called predictive coding. They used to think that, they say here historically, perception was seen as a passive bottom-up process, meaning information came to your brain, and then at that point, the brain had a response to it, like a very simple response based on what was going on. But now we can see it as being much more than that. Like I said, it includes the past, okay, what you've been through before. It includes information coming in from your body, includes information coming in from your environment or through your proprioception. Those are exteroception, interoception, what's called proprioception. This is sensory input to your brain. And your brain, again, reacts boom, boom, real fast in a matter of milliseconds to make a calculation. Okay, it's like a computer in our brain. And again, this predictive coding is a big piece of this here. So what we want to see here and what we need to understand is that it's related to a lot of things. So they say here it's important to note that in predictive coding and what we call active inference, okay, the term perception, so perception here, does not only apply to the inference of what is out there, okay, like what is coming in from your environment, exteroception, okay, that could be visual, auditory, taste, touch, smell, sight, sound, anything that's coming in from outside of you. Okay, so the idea here is that with this predictive coding, it doesn't only apply to stuff coming in, it also applies to the inner state of the body, okay, what's called interoception. Okay, and these are signals that your body sends to your brain, like fatigue, thirst, hunger, fast heart rate, sweating, dizziness, any kind of sensation that you can experience, all right? And what it says here is this interoception, which is really important to understand. It's a sense of physiological condition of the body. It's the sense of the physiological condition of the body and refers to the processing of information coming from within the body. So within your body that you notice, okay, you're aware of, you perceive, your perception. And again, it can be understood using the same predictive coding model, okay? And what's interesting about this here is that they mention here that some types of symptoms, right, or sensations that we feel on our body can be seen as a threat to the body, okay, based on, again, what we've learned from the past, our beliefs, our understanding, our prior experiences, the memories we have, what we've been told, right, who we've seen, doctors, everything that the brain can calculate off of, and our perception of that sensation and what it means in terms of what's coming in from outside your body at the same time. And what we need to understand here, and I'll bring you through this a little bit of an example they give here, is that they give this example of how danger can happen, right? So it's suggested that some apparently irrational thoughts, such as the presence of a danger that is very unlikely, like a thief, like say thieves coming into your house in a safe place, or even an imaginary agents like the fabled boogeyman. We talked about the boogeyman is going to come and scare you in your house, right? Might not be entirely irrational, but rather they result from a predictive coding process that integrates both exteroceptive and interoceptive sensations through this process. Okay, some stuff coming in from the outside, stuff coming in from your body to your brain. And I'll give you an example here so you can understand this in the real world. A person might hear an odd sound during the night and try to infer whether it was caused by the wind or a thief. Okay, and in this model here, they say in normal conditions, the person might consider the prior knowledge that the place or their house is safe and hence favor the wind hypothesis. It's just the wind blowing. However, imagine that the person has just experienced an event that raised their arousal and sympathetic tone and put their body in a heightened state of fear. Let's say, for example, you watched a horror movie or a violent movie that night, or a car accident, or social aggression, something in social media. Okay, there's some examples. The proposal is that interoceptive information from their body now, let's say high heart rate, you notice the heart rate beating fast, could impact the inference to decide whether the wind or a thief is the most likely hypothesis. Okay, so again, they say here in this sort of inference here, the person uses two sensory states to be explained: the odd sound and their unpleasant interoceptive sensations, let's say the high heart rate beating. During this multisensory integration in your brain, each input is weighed according to its precision and summed to provide the model evidence, okay, how the brain is going to react. And this happens boom, boom, so fast. And this is really important. I want you guys to understand this and take this in. I found this fascinating too. It has been suggested that interoceptive inputs, again, coming from your body, from an evolutionary perspective, are afforded a very high precision and are more reliable than exteroceptive ones, okay, coming in from your environment, sound, for example, in this example, especially during the darkness of night. So we rely upon what our bodies are giving us, the signals it's giving us. That's, from an evolutionary perspective, something we can rely upon, or our brain relies upon to give us information that what we should do. So they say here, while the wind could explain the sound, it is potentially a less reliable input compared with the thief hypothesis. That's a thief there, which better explains away the more reliable interoceptive input, the high heart rate. Okay, and hence the latter hypothesis is preferred. And they said this can go even further in terms of understanding this model with predictive coding, is that they say here it's the complexity of this model, okay, that can go on in the brain, and that the brain may choose the simpler model. So continue on this example of the window and the sound coming in and the thief, if it's just the wind or the thief, it's possible to assume two competing models. According to one model, the odd sound that the person hears and the high heart rate are explained by the same cause, be the thief. In the other model, the odd sound and the high heart rate are explained by two distinct causes. One is just the wind coming in, and that the individual previously watched a horror movie before they went to sleep. While the second model is probably more accurate, it is also more complex in the brain, and hence under certain conditions, it will not be selected. Okay, so it's important to understand. So the brain is going to select the simpler one and just make that assumption, you can say, in connection. Oh my God, there's a thief there. My heart rate's up. I'm hearing the sound. Oh my God, there must be a thief in the house. Okay, because it's going to weigh the information from your body more than it's going to know or understand. Oh, hey, I watched a horror movie earlier tonight, or something from my past now has sort of come in to weigh this input. And it says here that this example I'm just sharing with you highlights that a hypothesis that at first appears very irrational could in fact be a highly irrational one in the brain when we consider this scenario from this predictive coding model. Okay, because that jointly considers both the exteroceptive and the interoceptive information coming in. Okay, so this is what can happen, everybody, as you can see this here, is that the brain is having so many inputs here, and it's going to take a simple one, boom, and it's going to really be more protective, right? It's going to err on the side of caution, and it's going to take the information from your body and use that information quite strongly. It's going to take information from your past that's going to come in real quick and factor in. It's also going to take information in from your environment and use that as well to see what's going on here. Okay, so when they talk about the fear avoidance model here now, is that we can see here that this model says that when we face a threat, okay, when our brains face a threat or detect a threat, we adopt strategies to promote our survival, right? So some type of avoidance, we can go into fight, fleeing, or freezing, right? So say fighting is active coping, fleeing, active coping, freezing, passive coping. And what happens here is it encompasses a whole bunch of systems in the body. It's not just happening in your mind or in your brain. It says encompassing behavioral, autonomic nervous system, endocrine, cognitive response mechanisms. And one way to promote survival in us as humans is to minimize the number of encounters with threatful contexts. So, for example, patients experiencing chronic pain often perceive everyday social or physical activities as threatening, and they avoid engaging in them to prevent possible consequences, for example, more pain. So what happens here is that we see this as part of the fear avoidance model now, okay? And so we can see here where this information that's considered threatening can come in and start to change how the brain works here and the way the brain's going to predict things, the way the brain's going to interpret things, okay? So if the brain perceives it as threatening, okay, it's going to go into this model that we mentioned before, the fear avoidance model, right? And things are going to get worse. And that could lead to a vicious cycle, like they say here, which high pain-related fear would lead to higher avoidance, which will lead to higher disability and ultimately higher pain intensity, okay? So this article really goes into a lot here. I'm not going to go through all of it because I would be here for a pretty long time talking to you about this. Gives us another example of knee pain and how this can work. But just understand that when the brain can have its model geared towards threat, and again, whether it's true or not, or it's irrational, it doesn't matter. We need to understand the brain can do this because of the predictive coding model and from its learning and from the information coming in from your body. There could be prediction errors here, right? There could be errors. And that's what we're talking about, that many times there is nothing really dangerous or threatening happening, but your brain is kicking out that reaction based on the information it's pulling off of, okay? And so we need to have, again, that pathway of safety basically being stronger than the pathway of threat or danger in the brain, okay? Because what happens here, like they say before, as we go into the threat pathway, it starts to act as a predictor for more threat. Like they said, it acts like an attractor, okay? So it says now, sometimes everyday non-noxious sensory states, so non-painful states, can produce these defensive strategies. And this weighs into the brain now more and more in predictive ways for the future. Okay, so this is why things can get worse and worse. Things can spread and get worse, and pain's getting worse. You're having more reactions to more things. Okay, so the idea here is that we need to get the other pathway going. And they mention it here. I'm going to finish up with this on a positive note here. As much as I'm saying this is negative in terms of threat, we can teach the brain safety. In fact, that's what we need to do. And they say here in the article that we've offered a somewhat one-sided account detailing how these factors link pain, or you can say any symptom, and the development of associated behaviors like fear avoidance. The same framework offers potential for the development of novel management strategies. So exposing a patient to settings, to movements, to activities that are predicted to be dangerous and in an individualized, dosed fashion. So if we can do this in a graded exposure way, and here's where it gets important, in a context of support and safety. Okay, so we need to expose the patient again to the things that the brain perceives as threatening, okay, in a dosed fashion. This is graded exposure, but in a context of support and safety. This is what we need to change in our brain, okay? They say this would suggest potentially have positive outcomes to some of these pathways that exist in the brain, okay? So I find this really interesting, everybody, this work here that's been done here on not only the fear avoidance model, but it's called predictive coding here. Again, they mentioned predictive coding is now a leading theory, how the brain performs these perceptual inferences, okay, and the way it acts. And it's been used to explain several aversive sensations, okay? So again, the predictive coding could jointly consider exteroceptive information coming in from the outside, proprioceptive and interoceptive information to provide a new way to understand fear avoidance, which is again, something we see with a lot of chronic pain and chronic conditions. And so the idea here is that we need to create safety, okay? because they say if the fear response and threat interpretations are not correctly managed, the simplest causal inference will be of danger to bodily integrity despite its apparent irrationality. Read this one more time. If the fear response that any of you are still having and the threat that your brain is interpreting or producing are not correctly managed, as you can imagine, it's not going to go away. The simplest causal inference of the way the brain works will be of danger. It's still going to be signaling danger to bodily integrity despite its apparent irrationality, meaning it's irrational, it's not making any sense on paper. We know there's no threat or danger, but the brain is still reacting because of these different things. So our job is to shift these things, right? Our job is to shift the brain in the way of working again on the prior experiences. This is now memories, which I work with in the brain retraining classes. And people is to go back and try to change memories that may be inputting now that are affecting you, change beliefs that you have learned, information you've taken in that's not correct anymore. We want to change those negative beliefs to positive beliefs. We also want to get back to life and stop avoiding things we're doing because our brains perceive them as dangerous and they're not. So we need to update the brain towards safety. We kind of have to communicate messages of safety to the brain. We need to understand the brain can react, right? Because it feels threatened or under danger, but we need to know we're not under threat or danger. So our job in every way in this work is to teach safety. And they use this word here. They say threat or safety, right? So we're moving towards safety, that there's nothing wrong with you. This is just a brain going off or a brain reacting based on some of the stuff I talked about today, and bringing in this new predictive coding that we know how the brain can start to predict things. And that input coming in from prior experiences has a big impact on the brain and how it's going to react now. Okay, so we need to shift some of these things for our healing. I hope you found this information helpful. It's a little bit heady, it's a little bit technical, but I think it really helps to explain some of what's happening here from a brain perspective. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're looking for support or you want help, that's what I do for a living now. So you can reach me at thepainpt.com, offer both individual assessment and coaching as well as group brain retraining sessions to shift your brain. Thank you so much, everybody. See everybody next time. Bye-bye now.